So, our question today is, what do you thirst for? That's it. That's the question today. That's as we continue with this sermon series called Life Together, which is very aptly titled, Life Together, Christian Community in Tough Times. We're in a tough time right now, aren't we? And we can see that. I mean, there's a lot of people that are really struggling out there. There's actually this one video that came out this week of a vicar in England, and he's trying his best, just like me, to have a nice video service for everyone, and he's trying to make it look like not his bedroom or something like that, but to make it look important with candles and all that, and some problems. Let's watch it.
Well, welcome back to the last part of our online worship experience from St. Rita Parish Church. The last section we call waiting, and it's a great thing to pause in the presence of God and to ask the question, Lord God, what are you saying to us? And then, of course, to wait for an answer. I've just been pausing between these... Oh dear, I've just caught fire. Oh my word.
So we just like my friend Josh last week, we are still struggling, right? Like we're still trying to figure some of this stuff out. It can be pretty comical. In fact, I'll share this week a blooper from last week's as we were getting ready for all of this. But we're working on it, and I continue to encourage you to send in palm fronds and send in different things for this next week for Palm Sunday. Send pictures of you waving those this week. That we should be able to do some fun things with that. But we go back to our original question of, what do you thirst for? What do you thirst for? Like, one of the things I've really been surprised about over the years is how many people thirst for cheap beer. Like, I've never really been about it, but they just love it. They love the taste of like Natural Light or Bud Light or Miller Lite or I was just joking with Phil Fredericks just a little bit ago about how the reason why Coors Light has the mountains turn blue is when the mountains turns blue, it's actually drinkable because it's cold enough, right? Like that is kind of the idea of all of this, but it's their number one selling beers. Like, Budweiser sells more Bud Light than anything else. Like, it's unbelievable how much they sell of this stuff because it's just the normal cheap beer that people buy. And all these things. And I get it. My dad is a huge fan of like good beer. And I grew up in a house of self-employed people. And when times were going well, there was always like a Guinness or something like that, Heineken or so. I don't know. It was kind of a lot of stuff. My dad likes Guinness a lot. Like always that in the house. But when times were a little more lean, right? When times were more lean, suddenly the Guinness would disappear from the house and we would find Natural Light. And it became a huge joke in our family that when my parents, who loved to entertain, would have people over, that it was in the lean times that they would still have people over, but they would just serve Natural Light and ham. And it became like a joke with our family. They're like, oh, Natural Light and ham, that's what they're having. I also liked one of Mark's stories about this. Like his favorite memory of Natural Light is in college, of course. He went to the University of Florida. Of course he has his favorite memories around Natural Light. But a hurricane blew through and canceled everything for a week. They had no power, they had nothing. One of his roommates, they had a house, and one of his roommates' family had just given them like half a cow to give them beef for tailgating all through the college football season, and that now was all in jeopardy. So they had to cook all of that. Well, the college house 2 doors down from them had a kegerator filled with Natural Light. That was also in jeopardy now. And so they brought him over, and they brought over, he said, all this Natural Light in Tupperware containers and all that. And they said they sat and had this huge feast, eating all this meat and drinking all this Natural Light from Tupperware containers, right? And it has this great image, and it makes me laugh because Natural Light, everyone has experiences with it. And it's the drink of of just everyone. It's everyone's drink type of thing. Like these cheap beers, they're just there. So we go back to our original question. Is what do you thirst for? What do you thirst for? Maybe right now you're thirsting to get out of the house. To actually do something over there. You're beginning to stop. You're not being reassured anymore by Netflix asking, "You still watching?" It's like, I don't need you judging me, Netflix, right? What do you thirst for? Maybe you thirst to go out to dinner. Not just get carry out, but to actually sit down and then pour you pitchers of Natural Light as you enjoy your Chili's fajitas for two, right? Like maybe you thirst to go back to school. Maybe you thirst to be in here and worship with all your friends again. I don't know. Maybe you thirst for some cheap beer. I don't know. But one of the things Jesus says on the cross is, "I thirst." When we were reading our gospel lesson for this week, it really flew out of the page at me because I've known that there were things that were important in it before, but I had kind of missed some things or never really had time to study any of them, and we had a little bit of extra time or just hit it at the right time to see it, but it really stood out to me. But what we see here is that, first off, they put up a sign above Jesus that says he's the King of the Jews, which is interesting, and we can get the meaning behind that pretty easily. But in that, it's saying a true thing, but it's also mocking him at it, right? And then we see all the soldiers divide all of his clothes amongst themselves. And that kind of stood out to me because, in all honesty, that kind of feels like this situation right now. Or at least it kind of worries me. We were talking about Natural Light before, and it makes me think of all of the bartenders that are around. I mean, a lot of those bars, they can't work. They've been shut up for 2 weeks now? And as I think about Jesus seeing everyone as he's hanging helplessly on the cross, and he looks down and watches people just divide everything he owns right in front of him, divided up amongst themselves, I could only be thinking of that bartender and how are they thinking, "Oh, am I going to get evicted here soon because I can't make my rent payment? Am I going to have to watch helplessly as they throw all my possessions out to the street corner and I have to watch as people pick through all of that and divide it up amongst themselves?" What's he thirsting for? I think about myself. What if this online church model doesn't work? What if what I'm doing here isn't sustainable? Will my stuff be divided? Will I be divided? And will I have to stand by and watch from a place of suffering as I watch all my things get divided up? Maybe I thirst for something. Or maybe it's you, In this last week and 2 weeks, something like that, we've watched our stock portfolios just divided up and evaporate almost daily. Or you can't even get out of the house and you're lonely. And it seems like everything that you hold dear is just disappearing around you. And you say, "I thirst." When we look at the leaders in Washington as they squabble about trying to get the people help, and they're like, "Oh, it's the Democrats' fault," or "It's the Republicans' fault. They're the nasty ones over there." And we look on powerless as we watch them divide everything up that we hold dear, and we go, I thirst. And you look at Jesus, and he's going through exactly the same things, and he says, I thirst. And that's, in the I thirst part is the part that really stood out to me, because I'd never really noticed anything about it before. Because like he says, he goes, I thirst, and then they take a hyssop branch, fill a sponge filled with wine vinegar, and lift it up to him, right? And he drinks the wine vinegar, and I'm like, wine vinegar? It's like, ooh, gross. Like, what in the world? And there's even some theologians out there that try to make it more gross than it actually is. That I now realize that stuff is wrong. I mean, I could be wrong about this today. Not, though. And he drinks the wine vinegar. I'm like, ooh, gross. And I began to think, I'm like, but, I kind of think Natural Light's gross. Or at least not gross, but close to water, right? But that's when I started reading about it, and that's what wine vinegar actually was. It was the drink of the common man. It was the drink of the day laborer. It was the drink of the soldier. So it would make sense that when soldiers are performing this crucifixion, they would have wine vinegar just sitting right there. It was there. In all honesty, wine vinegar was probably cheaper than water. It was definitely more sanitary because it had alcohol in it and vinegar. And so it's definitely more sanitary. You wouldn't get sick from it. But I do think the symbolism of having wine vinegar there, that when Jesus says, I thirst, they reach down and they quench his thirst, not with pure, good, amazing wine or expensive beer, but the cheap, everyday stuff. And then we continue on and we deal with the hyssop branch. Now, if you were a Hebrew and you heard that they lifted up a hyssop branch up to Jesus on the cross, you would have been like, hold on, because you would have heard something. Like, I've always just passed by the hyssop branch like, okay, but listen, in the Gospels, they don't write anything on accident, right? It's all on purpose. And they lifted up with a hyssop branch, and the Hebrews would have been thinking, like, wait a second. Because they would have known something that I have always missed. And you're not going to miss it anymore after this. They lifted it up with a hyssop branch, and a hyssop branch is what was used in the Exodus when they would cover the ends with blood and wipe blood over the door frames at Passover so God could save his people. Now, let me see if I can paint the picture for you here. So what they did is Jesus says, I thirst. And they filled a sponge with Natty Light, with Natural Light, with cheap beer, with those 90s wine coolers, with, all those things, with wine vinegar. They filled it, put it on the end of a hyssop branch, brought it up to them, and spread that wine vinegar like the blood of the Lamb up on the cross. I don't want you to miss the symbolism of all of this. I mean, think about this. Jesus said, I thirst, and they reached down and filled up a sponge with just the common drink, the White Claw, the wine coolers that were popular in the 90s, Natural Light, right? That wine vinegar, and they spread it over the top of the cross, giving it to them like blood from the very Lamb of God. And when that happened, Jesus said, it is finished. It wasn't, Jesus didn't take, his last drink wasn't a steak dinner. It wasn't the best lamb dish you've ever had. Jesus' last meal, his last drink was a drink just a common drink with all of us. And that's a beautiful symbol because Jesus didn't drink the fine wines on the ivory towers, but he came and he just drank like every one of us. And he sits with us in all of that. It reminded me of a funeral I did a while back, about a year ago now. And it was a young concrete worker. And I think about this. It made me think about it because I'm watching them pour the concrete right now as I'm filming this here at Grace. But he's a young concrete worker, and he died on a job in a worksite accident. He was newly married, and he had a young child, and it was a tragic, tragic funeral. And as we did the graveside and I finished up my service, the CEO of the concrete company came out, and they handed out T-shirts, work T-shirts that they used whenever they went on the job site. They gave everyone a work T-shirt. It's like this neon yellow. They gave everyone a work T-shirt. And then he opened up a cooler and gave everyone the cheap beer that he always drank. And they all sat in solidarity and told stories about their friend and coworker who has passed on. And that's the image I think that Jesus and the gospel writers is giving us. That when God rolled up his sleeves to get the work of salvation done, he did it with the common and everyday drinks. So know this. That when we begin to suffer, like I think many of us are right now, can't go outside, can't hang out with people, can't give friends hugs right now. I know some of you, that's like as bad as it gets, right? Like that's and as someone to me who I like contact, like it's a big deal. But some of us, we don't know if our stuff's going to get divided, and all those things we do. There's a lot of questions in the air right now. Know that God isn't sitting in some ivory tower somewhere watching all this from a distance, but he's sitting with you right now. And so we suffer with him just like he suffers with us. And he's going to lead us through this. So have peace, knowing that God is always with you. And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there.